In this video, we're going to look at the processes our minds go through to clarify ambiguity in an utterance. And we'll talk about different kinds of ambiguity that might be involved. That is going to include lexical ambiguity, syntactic ambiguity, and scopal ambiguity. Recall what we've already said about communication. Typically, we don't say everything we mean. Instead, we under-encode when we speak. Therefore, what we say has to be enriched by the hearer in order to clarify it. We've also mentioned 4 types of enrichment that goes on. A hearer may need to resolve ambiguity, vagueness, ellipsis, and reference. In this session, we're going to look particularly at ambiguity. Let's start with the case of lexical ambiguity, which is where a word potentially has 2 or more distinct meanings. In this case, the hearer enriches an utterance by inferring the most relevant meaning in the context. For example, I want you to imagine a homeowner who's talking to a conservation officer, and he says, "I've got a bat in the attic." How is the conservation officer going to enrich this utterance? What does bat mean here? The most relevant sense for bat in this context is surely a flying rodent roosting in the top of the house. However, what if a friend comes around to my house and says, "Do you fancy a game of cricket?" In this case, if I say, "I've got a bat in the attic," it would be rather irrelevant for me to have started talking about flying rodents. So he's most likely to enrich what I've said by assuming that I'm talking about a bat in the sense of a wooden implement for hitting a ball. The important thing to notice here is that without any context, the word bat is ambiguous, and as a result, so is the utterance, "I've got a bat in the attic." However, when we're in a specific context, the hearer should be able to enrich this utterance and infer the correct meaning. Let's look briefly at an example of possible lexical ambiguity in the Bible. In the translation of Pharaohs Dream in Genesis 41 verse 5, the King James Version talks about 7 ears of corn upon one stalk, like this. "And he slept, and he dreamed the second time, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk." The phrase ears of corn was also used in the UK version of the Good News translation. But the problem with this phrase, ears of corn, is that it can have at least 2 meanings. In the UK, it's most likely to be enriched with the sense of the top of a stalk of wheat, whereas in America, hearers are more likely to infer the sense the cob of a maize plant. In fact, I've seen an illustrated children's Bible which strengthens this incorrect interpretation by showing a picture of Pharaoh dreaming of maize plants eating each other. Because we know in this context that Pharaoh was not dreaming of maize, the American version of the Good News translation does something different, as do most other English translations, and they talk about heads of grain instead of ears of corn, which is less ambiguous and helps people to enrich the sentence in the correct way. Here's another example of ambiguity in the Bible. Do you remember Elijah confronted the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel? Then after that, in 1 Kings 18:43, we have this little bit. He said to his servant, "Go up now, look towards the sea." And he went up and looked and said, "There is nothing." And he said, "Go again 7 times. The ambiguity here is not just on the level of the word, but to do with how the sentence is put together. Did Elijah just speak to the servants once and say, "Go again 7 times"? Or did he speak to him 7 times, each time saying, "Go again"? The meaning depends on how you enrich this utterance. In English, we put punctuation marks in that give us extra clues to know how to do it, but there are no speech marks in Hebrew, so they don't give us any help. Most English translations choose to say that Elijah spoke to him 7 times, and each time said, "Go again." However, the New Revised Standard Version has Elijah just making 1 command, to go again 7 times. This kind of ambiguity is called syntactic ambiguity rather than lexical ambiguity because it's based on enriching how the different parts of a sentence fit together rather than on different word meanings. Here's another classic example of syntactic ambiguity. There are 2 possible ways to enrich the sentence, "Sherlock saw the man using binoculars." One in which Sherlock has the binoculars and the other in which the man has the binoculars. To explain the difference, we might note that on the left, the man is the object of the sentence, and using binoculars tells us the instrument that Sherlock, the subject, used to see him. On the right, the man using the binoculars creates one noun phrase, which is the object of the sentence. The whole thing is what Sherlock saw. Sometimes when discussing such problems, it's helpful to be able to express the different possible interpretations unambiguously. Here, the one on the left could be Sherlock saw the man by using binoculars, and the one on the right could be Sherlock saw the man who was using binoculars. Of course, usually hearers infer the intended meaning based on what is relevant in their context. However, in translation, when the context may not be obvious to the readers, it may be necessary to re-express the sentence in an unambiguous way to make it easier for the hearers to enrich it correctly. Here's another example of syntactic ambiguity which was noted by a former student of mine. He heard a 4-year-old talking to his father and saying, "I like pizza more than you, Daddy." Of course, this is ambiguous because it could mean he likes pizza more than his dad likes pizza, or that he likes pizza more than he likes his dad. The issue is the syntactic function of you in this sentence. Is it intended as an object to be filled out as "I like you," or as a subject to be filled out as "you like pizza"? The ambiguity may be less if the utterance was made in a language that has different pronouns for subject and object. Notice it's worth noting that the grammatical patterns of the languages we speak may affect the kind of ambiguities that need to be resolved. Here's one more example of syntactic ambiguity from the translation of the Bible into English. In the 1984 version of the New International Version, and also in the English Standard Version that came later, the translators went for a fairly literal translation of Psalm 1, which says, "Blessed is the man who does not stand in the way of sinners." This refers to standing in the way of sinners. And the hearer is supposed to enrich this to understand that there's a certain path that sinners follow, and they should not stand on that path. That is, "in the way" should be interpreted as a location. However, in English, standing in the way of something is a common way of talking about obstructing something. So a hearer may actually enrich this to say they should not obstruct sinners, they should not stand in the way of sinners. The 2011 revision of the NIV resolves this ambiguity by saying, "Blessed is the one who does not stand in the way that sinners take," and now it's no longer ambiguous. So we've looked at lexical ambiguity and syntactic ambiguity. A third kind of ambiguity that we might find is called scopal ambiguity, which you might think is slightly more complicated, and it results from certain kinds of words that can have scope over different parts of an utterance. These types of words include quantifiers, like all and every or each, adjectives, negatives, and some adverbs, like probably or possibly. The ambiguity results from different possibilities as to where the scope ends. For example, in an utterance I've got here, "My youngest son and daughter are in primary school," the scope of the adjective youngest is not clear. The hearer has to enrich for themselves whether this is my youngest son and my youngest daughter, or my youngest son and my only daughter. I have not fully encoded what I wanted to communicate, and the hearer needs to enrich it. Another type of scopal ambiguity relates to the scope of negation. If I say the sentence, "I didn't leave home because of my mother's cooking," can you think of two ways to interpret it? You could either infer that I did leave home, but it was for some other reason than my mother's cooking, such as needing my own space. So, I didn't leave home because of my mother's cooking, I left because I needed my own space. But you could also infer that I didn't actually leave home. I didn't leave home because of my mother's cooking, for the reason that it was so good, for example. Under the first interpretation, the negation has scope over the whole of the rest of the sentence. So I didn't leave home because of my mother's cooking. Under the second interpretation, it's just leave home that is negated. I didn't leave home because of my mother's cooking. You might enjoy making up your own examples of this kind of sentence. but also listen out for examples of scopal ambiguity in your conversations with others this week. Let's remember what we've been doing. In this video, we've talked about one type of enrichment, where hearers try to resolve ambiguity when they hear an utterance, to clarify what the speaker was intending to communicate. This ambiguity might be lexical, related to words with two or more meanings, syntactic, where there are structures of sentences with two or more meanings, or scopal, where negation, quantifiers or adjectives may have scope over two or more parts of the sentence. In the next video, we're going to look at the next type of enrichment, vagueness.